Hello and welcome. This is the second episode of The State of Things with C.K. Slater. I'd like to welcome a very good friend and fraternity brother of mine, Rich Rivera. Rich is a copyright lawyer and has a long background doing that, but I'll let you take that away a little bit.
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm actually not as much of a copyright lawyer as I am a trademark lawyer. I do practice in both of the kind of softer intellectual property fields as copyright and trademark. I don't practice as much in patent work in that I don't prosecute patents because I don't have the technical background. I do work in litigation on the patent side, and I also have a practice that's just kind of general business litigation, a lot of different commercial disputes, a lot of contract issues, and part of that is kind of a niche focus on consumer protection defense work, which is interesting to say the least.
Just to go a little deeper there, would you say you find yourself putting on more hats than maybe you expected to, or how has that developed since you started practicing?
Certainly. When I first got out of law school, I knew that I was going to be in litigation, or actually at some point during law school, I had kind of gotten out of the ambivalent, I wonder what I'm going to be when I grow up, and decided that I was going to be in litigation once I got out of law school. Some of that came about from some work experience during law school, and some of that just came about from kind of the motivation to go to law school in the first place, seeing the high drama, courtroom dramas, and different things of that nature that show the exciting things.
Yeah. Well, being someone who did go to law school but didn't, shall we say, stick the landing, I can totally understand where you're coming from there and how impactful, Law and Order or The Firm.
Absolutely.
Or even for me, what was it? Keanu Reeves and Al Pacino.
Devil's Advocate. Yes.
Yeah. Some of those good ones. That was filmed in Gainesville.
It was.
And the Jacksonville courthouse was the first where he's defending, I think, a pedophile or a child molester.
Right. I actually had the privilege to attend a awards dinner and banquet put on by I'm going to butcher the name of it. I don't know the exact name of the organization now, but it's essentially the Jacksonville Bureau for Movie Production and Entertainment. And we had a great slideshow of a bunch of different movies and TV shows that have been filmed in and around Jacksonville, and that was one of the ones that was highlighted as probably one of the more famous editions of Jacksonville appearing.
Well, given the demographic or geographic makeup of the audience, some of them will probably already know this, but just to give some context, back at the turn of the century, people thought that Jacksonville might end up turning into Hollywood. For a host of reasons, that didn't end up happening, but the city does have a greater than expected involvement in the film industry. And so, that could it logically leads to, some of the way that has happened and the involvement of some of these organizations.
Absolutely. Jacksonville has such a great landscape and so many kind of different pockets of town that were, it can be a complete beach town on film, and it can be kind of the older southern town on
Hanging
film.
Moss, all that.
Right. And it has just such a bunch of great filming locations that it really does lend itself well to that.
The river, of course.
Oh, absolutely. I was actually in the Philadelphia airport the other day, and going between terminals, they have an entire wall lined with movie posters of different movies that have been filmed in Philadelphia. And, they really are advertising the fact that they're out there. Jacksonville doesn't really put out there that much how much it has appeared on different famous television shows and movies. I think that it's kind of doing itself a little bit of a disservice in not making that more well known, because it really is a great place.
I'd absolutely agree with you, and I think this is a theme we could come back to several times. But Jacksonville, the facts on the ground being one thing, but what the rest of the country understands the city to be is a completely different thing. Where we're the 12th largest metropolitan area in the nation, we have anything going to or coming out of the East Coast, going up or down the East Coast by truck is going to have to come down through the I-95 corridor.
Right.
I-10 goes all the way to California.
Absolutely.
We're a huge rail hub, and we may dredge the port. And I know there's some environmental questions around that.
Right.
But
even without dredging, we've just installed a new intermodal facility there at the port to help facilitate getting containers off of ships onto trucks, onto trains. CSX is located here. Norfolk Southern does a lot of work through here. There's a lot of rail activity here that maybe people aren't necessarily aware of on a general basis.
Well, to shift things a little bit, what do you think about what's been going on up in D.C.? And I know maybe this isn't your area of expertise, but that's one of the things I like to bring up anytime I bring folks in here, especially folks who you weren't born in Jacksonville, were you, Rich?
That's correct. I moved around quite a bit. I was in a military family growing up. I actually wasn't born too far from here. I was born in Tampa. But in between that time, I've lived in Puerto Rico, California, New York, a slight sojourn in Georgia.
We won't hold that against you.
I appreciate that. But as far as what's going on right now, within the last couple of days in DC, it's very interesting, to say the least, with the kind of compromising and backroom dealing that seems to be going on lately with passing of the
American Health Care Act.
The American Health Care Act, the repeal of the
or portions of
Obamacare, and it's very interesting. And I also, there's this clip that's going around right now of as soon as the Republicans passed the
Democratic caucus singing,
they started singing
"Na na na."
Right.
Hey, 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 goodbye.
I think the name of the song is Goodbye. I don't know who it.
Well, you would know this. You're the best trivia player I know.
I try.
Hopefully I'm the second best.
Well,
I'll take it if I can get it.
Yeah. So the Democratic caucus started singing that, and the question really is, how much is this really going to play a role in the future elections? And obviously the Democrats think that this is sealing the deal, and
this is their Tea Party. They're going to get to come back and have their 2010, and
right.
This is the not even past as prologue, but past as preface, or past is predictive of what's going to happen.
Absolutely. And there's I was listening recently within the last couple of days to some commentators wondering that if the House knew that the bill that they passed on Thursday would become law on Monday, if they would have voted to pass it, or are they really counting on the Senate to come back with kind of making some chops and making some revisions that they couldn't necessarily get done themselves in the House?
Well, that's one of those questions that I think is kind of 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, where obviously we have to expect that everyone understands the way the political winds are blowing and the way Congress works well enough, because they work there, that they understand that they have to take the bill to the Senate, and then the Senate's going to do whatever it's going to do, and then they're going to have to go in conference if those bills are substantially different and come to a single bill that both chambers feel comfortable with. So yes, this is the first step of a long road, but I do think the way they were really able to take a second bite at that apple has surprised a lot of folks, because that was supposed to be the weakness of the administration, is that they don't understand the workings of government well enough to get anything like this done, especially in an environment where we can say some of the cards, or at least optics, are stacked against them.
Absolutely.
But please do go on.
Well, the main question that it raises for me really is it's a constitutional question. The Constitution is set up, and it was a big sticking point in drafting the Constitution to have a bicameral legislature with both the chambers of Congress having to essentially pass a bill. And if you're passing a bill in one chamber of Commerce with the expectation that the second chamber is not going to pass that, and essentially you're just kind of passing the buck, it kind of really just cuts against the way that the system is designed to operate.
Which is to operate and not to not operate.
Right. It's not designed so that you can essentially pass the buck to somebody else and say, well, I tried to do something, but,
Well, to a certain extent, the Senate was designed to be a break on, or to be a restraint on kind of the hothouse nature of the House.
Sure, and I agree that is its design and what it should do. I guess the point that I am making is not that it's supposed to keep the House from kind of going the way that it wants to go, and which may be overly reactive to things, but my questioning is rather geared towards the fact that should congressmen be voting for something they don't even want with the expectation that, not that they don't necessarily want it, they don't necessarily understand it, with the expectation that, the Senate will clean things up.
Yeah, the question of to what extent is this, Plato's shadow on the wall to what extent is this kabuki theater where it's just a signal and dance that people are going to use to score political points, but everyone knows it's going to go a certain way, and they're basically just using, like they always do, using passing this legislation as an opportunity to get on their soapbox and say, we did this, we've moved it forward, but knowing that the ultimate bill will obviously probably not 100% materially reflect what was passed in the House.
Right. I think that's pretty safe to assume at this point.
Oh, absolutely. But, it comes back to the what is salient with the populace, what kind of messages are going to ring true with them. And I think anytime you're arguing Senate procedure with people, you're swimming upstream, man.
Yeah.
But have you been involved with anything locally, or do you follow any issues here, or?
I actually have not been too involved with anything locally, and that's kind of it's been a little bit of an oversight that I've decided that I need to cut back on. I'm very involved in a couple of organizations. One's an International Trademark Association, and the other is the American Bar Association. So I have a lot of ties and a lot of involvement with kind of big picture issues, really big picture issues, but I'm not.
Massive picture.
Yeah, but not too involved in the local Jacksonville issues going on. One issue that I've been following, or was following kind of closely, was the pension deal.
Obviously, that's concerned all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm not a city employee, and I don't really know a lot of city employees.
You're not an immediate stakeholder.
Except for judges.
Yeah. And hopefully not too well.
Yeah, well. And the other issue is not so much a legislative issue, but just kind of the development and the revitalization of downtown. I work downtown. I love downtown. I think it's a great place, and that more people should be experiencing downtown in Jacksonville. And they've done some great things to bring more people downtown, such as the Art Walk once a month, and the One Spark Festival was great, and unfortunately it's kind of gone the way of the dodo.
I think it kind of got a little far out over its skis.
It did.
Where, and if you don't know about One Spark, which I'm sure most of you do, it is a entrepreneur and kind of a crowdsourced idea festival where they take different business ideas and people get to go and vote on which ones they like the most, and the ones that win can get access to financing or a host of other things. Unfortunately, a lot of people were trying to get funding for ideas like who could grow their afro the biggest, or who could see how many angels dance on the head of a pin, or
Right.
Whatever it might be.
Yeah, there was a lot of great ideas out at One Spark, and it's a great idea. I mean, in general, to have this festival, but like you said, in execution, it kind of fell a little flat in places.
Which is your favorite, and why?
Well, are we speaking in terms of actors who have portrayed Batman?
I think, okay, we'll split it up. We'll say both individually and actors who portrayed Batman, which was your favorite, and out of all the Batman movies, or the way Batman was portrayed in the movie, which was your favorite portrayal of Batman?
Certainly. I'll address the movie question first, and I'm going to cheat.
Okay.
And say that it's two movies together.
Okay.
Which I think together tell the greatest Batman story that's ever been told on film.
Well,
and that is
that's quite a swing at the ball there, my friend.
Well, it is Batman Begins with The Dark Knight.
Which
put together.
I mean, if we're gonna say, I gotta say I'm in the same camp as you. I think, I don't know. I feel like the Batman series suffered what I think happens to James Bond after someone's been Bond too long, where it starts off a really strong opener. We can talk about Casino Royale, but I think you'll see as the movies go on, they get a little bit more ludicrous, and take a little bit more chances, and eventually you can compound that interest by the fourth movie,
right? And
you've got a guy in a titanium blimp changing everyone's dreams or something. I remember one of them was like...
Or you've got a army of thugs playing ice hockey with the largest diamond that you've ever seen to get away from Batman and Robin.
Yeah, and on the other hand, you have Casino Royale, which opens in one of the most suspenseful black and white sequences I have ever personally seen, which is obviously the scene where he earns his second kill to get his second O for 007. And it is a lot more of a struggle than you would expect.
Absolutely.
More of a blunt instrument back in the day. But back to Batman.
Well, they say that the second time is easier.
They do say that. And I think that whoever he shot in the face would agree.
Right. Speaking of Casino Royale, I don't know how many times I've watched that movie with somebody who has potentially not seen any of the James Bond movies before, or had not seen Casino Royale before, and just gotten to the end of that original opening black and white scene, that vignette, and just stopping it and being like, did you catch all that? And just backing it up and replaying it over again. Because it really is, it's a great opening scene for just about any film.
Yeah, well, I think we're kind of in the same camp with our appreciation of that opener, and with the movie as a whole, kind of as a contribution to the greater canon of James Bond. Wow, this is getting really nerdy. It's okay, though. It's okay.
Right.
But, so back to Batman, we hit the movie question.
Right.
But back to the actor question.
Sure. And, I think touching on an easier question, which I think is opened up by the movie question, I have a large affinity for Christopher Nolan, and he is far and away the best director that has touched a Batman movie.
I can't disagree with you.
He did things that were almost unthinkable when you look back at the two movies created by Joel Schumacher, who came before Christopher Nolan, the Bat Nipples, as it were.
Oh, the Bat Nipples. I remember.
But as far as my favorite actor to portray Batman, I can't really say that I have a favorite. Each actor has come at it in a different way.
Brings their own
if
sauce.
we're taking it and trying to remove the actual film surrounding the actor, I think every actor has done it in their way and has created, at least in my mind, a lasting impression. I'm interested to see Ben Affleck doing more in the Justice League movie and a standalone Batman movie, if that is to come.
To expand on what you said, I'd like to see them do maybe a little bit more justice to Batman.
Absolutely.
The next go around.
Right. The Batman versus Superman was not my favorite Batman movie, to put it simply. Don't get me wrong. I love all the Batman movies in their own way, including Batman and Robin. But Batman vs. Superman, I think actually was the last movie I actually saw in a movie theater. Went and saw it on opening day with a friend of mine in Washington, D.C. And it was, I enjoyed it, but I also left knowing that it wasn't necessarily a, quote, good movie, or that it would be well appreciated by the majority of people.
Who did they have playing Lex? I can't remember his name.
They had
or something.
Jesse Eisenberg.
Yeah.
Previously portrayed Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah. Well, we can go down that path. Oh God, who directed Social Network?
That was David Fincher.
Thank you. Also did House of Cards. But I thought that was one of my favorite movies of the last 10 years. Just all the emotional beats, and kind of I guess in the same way I like House of Cards, but that kind of stark human landscape that he paints.
Sure. David Fincher is he's up there with Christopher Nolan, one of my favorite directors. Not quite on the same level where I haven't gone out and sought out every
It's not that you hear
work.
He's doing a movie and you're counting down the days.
Exactly. I wouldn't count myself in as a super fan of David Fincher.
Yeah.
Like I would of Christopher Nolan. But, from Seven, Fight Club, and even the American version of Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. I mean, they were all
I thought that
great
was
movies.
very well done. And I actually think he was a great choice to choose for a director to cover at least that kind of a story.
Right.
I think his talents were put to very good use there. He's actually one of 3 directors that I will, if they come up, I'll go see. It's Christopher Nolan, Denis Villeneuve, who did Arrival, Sicario. I mean, you know me, I'm going to get on my hobby horse about that every time we talk about movies. But yeah, David Fincher as well. But I know we have Blade Runner 2049 coming up, which I'm really excited for.
I'm not too familiar with it.
Ryan Gosling's playing.
No, I do know Ryan Gosling is playing Deckard. And who's directing that again?
The guy
is it Villeneuve?
Yeah.
Okay, that's who I thought, but I wasn't sure if maybe Ridley Scott was involved somehow. Maybe, probably.
I'm sure he is, and maybe an executive producer. They're always involved, generally.
Right.
Ridley Scott's great too.
Oh, absolutely! I'm excited for the new Alien movie. I was a little. I expected more and different things from Prometheus, and this is looking to deliver on those things that I expected from Prometheus.
I feel like I was less attached to maybe the Aliens franchise, and I think that maybe allowed me to enjoy that movie a little bit more, because I was less wanting maybe a specific thing, because I know there are a lot of kind of hearts are in a lot of different places with regards to how they feel about Prometheus. And I did think it was, I thought it was a great movie if you take it kind of as its own, but if you want to assume the expectations of the other movies into it, I can absolutely see how, where it went and what expectations were diverged.
Right. I came late to Alien, and I think watched all 4 of the quadrilogy.
Even the one where it's like half human and it goes out the window from the acid spit.
Yeah, but I watched those in probably 2010, so Prometheus was just a couple of years removed from that, and I was, I came in very excited eyes to kind of get what was very recent to me, but obviously had been around for quite a bit.
Yeah.
I had seen Alien versus Predator, but that's like seeing Freddy versus Jason and saying that you've seen A Nightmare on Elm Street. You really have not.
Or like saying you've seen a couple argue at Subway at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday and saying you've seen Shakespeare.
Yes, pretty much.
Well, all right, what other passions do you have? I know baseball's a big one, and I can't, help you here as much as I otherwise could. But Take it away.
I grew up playing baseball. My father was actually a pitcher and was drafted out of high school by the Philadelphia Phillies. Decided to go to college instead of going and playing for the Phillies. So he never actually went into the minors or the majors. He got derailed by a shoulder injury. But I love the sport. My team is the New York Mets, and they've had a bit of a renaissance lately.
So I've heard.
Yes. They had
the acid tongue satire is not quite as useful as it used to be.
Yeah, the beginning of this season notwithstanding, they've gotten away from the New York Mess nickname. So they've been making a couple of playoff appearances.
That is a great.
It is good.
I know it's not fun from your perspective, but as far as, that was a pretty witty.
Right. So they're doing better on the whole this season. They're off to a bit of a rocky start. They lost a bunch in a row, but they're righting the ship, I think.
Well, there are a ton of games in the season as well.
Oh yeah, with 162 games in a season, you got a lot of time to get your bearings and start moving in the right direction.
And I think that's one of the things I asked you last time is how far into the season before you knew kind of how things were going. And you said maybe after the All-Star break?
Around the All-Star break is generally when you get an idea of who your playoff teams are going to be.
Mm-hmm.
Before that, there's so much room in the season, and you play the same team so many times that you can really make up a lot of ground if you're behind in the standings in your league. But with the All-Star break, it's about midway through the season, and on top of that, you've also got the trade deadline right after the All-Star break. So you kind of see where every team is making their last big push, to get there to the end, and it's just kind of things start to crystallize in the solution, I guess.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, if we're going to bring up sports, I'd be remiss if I didn't say, how about them Florida Gators?
Oh, go Gators. Did you know,
in all kinds of weather, we all stick together.
That is what I hear, and that is what I like to think. I was in Montreal, Canada, a couple of days ago, and
Not to be confused with Montreal, Mexico.
That is correct. It's a little colder in the Canadian one than the Mexican one.
I hear that the horn honks are a little bit different. It's not, the mariachi song.
Not a lot of horn honking. The Canadians are extremely polite, generally.
They're about the politeness?
Correct.
Okay.
And I came down in my hotel, and there was a gentleman wearing a Florida Gator hoodie, an older gentleman, and I couldn't help myself. I exclaimed, "Go Gators!" And he just kind of looked at me and kind of looked away, and I was like, oh. Thought I'd get a little something there.
Yeah. Maybe it's a little bit different.
Yeah, I guess so. I don't know. Maybe he picked it up in a thrift shop or something.
Yeah, I was just cold, man.
Right. Funny. I also at the same time saw somebody in my hotel wearing a Jacksonville Bank Marathon race shirt.
That's really oddly specific.
It was. It was actually the one iteration of the race that I ran in 2010. And unfortunately, he was talking to people. I was going to stop and be like, "Hey, I ran that race." It was just...
You ran a marathon?
I did in 2010. Well, thanks.
I did not know that about you.
I
That's
did.
Awesome.
It was my first year of law school. It was the December, so the end of the first semester.
So you were trying to be the Gold Star kid.
Right.
Okay. I'm just trying to set the stage here.
Sure. I had really gotten into running throughout the previous year and kind of amped up my mileage, and I thought, well, I might as well try to get a marathon. So I trained and did a half marathon in November. That was on Thanksgiving Day, which is a great race.
If I was to describe the situation, would you agree that he just kept on running?
He just kept running. He just put one foot in front of the other, and it's not much to training to run.
Right out of Greenbow, Alabama.
The problem is knowing when to stop.
Yeah. Well, okay. I think that is the end of our segment, but we will come right back. And we are back with Rich Rivera. Well, thank you very much for telling me a little bit more about your Batman proclivities. If you cast an eye towards Washington in the last couple of weeks, we have finally seen some legislative movements this past week. After much arm twisting and cajoling and tongue lashing, and I'm sure all kinds of gymnastics, the Republicans in the House were able to pass the American Health Care Act. You want to go into that just a little bit?
Sure. Is there a particular aspect of it that you'd like to dig in?
One of the things I think about the entire situation is that any time you pass a piece of domestic legislation that large without bipartisan buy-in, I think it's an inevitable thing where when the next party comes into power, they're going to use their ability to dismantle whatever that was as kind of a revenge club, and it just kind of goes back and forth.
Absolutely.
I mean, do you think that we could use with a little bit more, at least, across the aisle buy-in in at least the kind of formulation phase?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, obviously we're seeing the pendulum swing the other way here and it was 2011, 2012 when the Affordable Care Act was...
I think it was 2009.
Well, right.
But then the kind of consequences...
Right. I was talking more, I guess, kind of the Supreme Court cases that came out.
Oh, yeah.
In 2012 was the first big one that came out and basically
is that Whoever versus Sebelius?
That was the one that came out and said that... the mandatory mandatory coverage provision was a tax and therefore constitutional. But obviously this is all stemming from 2009 when it first was passed, and there wasn't any buy-in on the right to it, and the right has challenged it every chance that they've gotten. In fact,
and I'll be the first to admit the way we've gone about this hasn't been hands across America. Right.
And, up through 2011, 2012, when these challenges were percolating through the court system, it made sense to challenge it that way. And, if this is not constitutional, then it shouldn't be going forward. Once there was the ruling that came out, and, I think John Roberts delivered the opinion, the Chief Justice there, who identifies as right, but still...
To the chagrin of many folks. Well, I think he was kind of in a tough spot. He was kind of like in the James Comey chair, but when that was going on, I think he could see the need for maybe a national dialogue about healthcare as opposed to maybe health insurance, and that's kind of a topic I'm going to dig into a little bit more here in a moment. But I do think that he was weighing the political or just the externalities of what it would mean overturning the Affordable Care Act and how much government effort had gone into creating the support structure for that, and just how it would be a mess. And there are a whole host of reasons that I can understand, despite the fact that I'm not the biggest fan of the Affordable Care Act in the world, and I'm sure I've whinged and moaned about it to you or an infinite number of other people. But yeah, like I said, I just think John Roberts was in a tough spot there.
Absolutely. I mean, all the justices were in a tough spot there. And I mean, at that point, there had been in place for 3 years, and there was infrastructure created, and there was a lot of things that were propped up on the assumption.
There was a website that may or may not have been working.
Right. Intermittently, it provided some sort of function.
Yes.
What the extent of that function was, no one knows. But it did work at some point. And, based on all that, they were absolutely in a tough spot. But my point being that, if the Republicans are challenging it as being unconstitutional, that I agree that is a challenge that should be made if that's the way that they feel. But this coming back and having a revenge club where we're just going to come in
where that's what it's going to be the first 6 months of every new administration is.
Right, and that's not something...
we're going to put all your golden calves on the table and slaughter them.
Absolutely, and that puts everyone in that same tough position where you're creating infrastructure, you're creating jobs and all sorts of things based on the assumption that the status quo continues.
You're also creating a precedent of political behavior that's troubling,
which
is maybe the most worrisome thing out of it all.
Right. I mean, it harkens back to the French revolutions, and they're on their sixth republic now, or something along those lines, where they really just the new party comes in and there's blood in the streets, and that's
well, if
not
you forget about what we were before the Articles of Confederation, and depending on how you consider the whole TIF in 1865,
right?
I think we're still on our first.
Yeah, I believe so.
So we got that going for us.
Yeah, that we do. I mean, in all seriousness, it is impressive that we have developed a system that generally works and that generally has buy-in from the public, that we have elections that are decided based on electoral votes and not necessarily the popular vote, and even in that case where the candidate loses
the popular vote
by 2 million votes, there's not rioting in the streets. The administration changed over on January 20th at 12 noon, and
there's not rioting in the streets. Asterisks.
Well, there's protesting, and there's
so maybe some things you could possibly consider riots.
There's demonstrating, but
we're not. It's not the end of the world.
Right. We're not talking about rampant anarchy and
cats and dogs living together, mass hysteria.
Right. We're not turning over the constitutional system. We're not talking about calling a constitutional convention to redo everything, to get rid of the electoral college. I know many people have discussed getting rid of the electoral college, but that's kind of an academic thing and is not something that is being bandied about in the salons around.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it's being argued by enough voices that it's a serious legislative concern anytime soon. I do want to bring up something that we've been dancing around talking about the Supreme Court. I'm really worried that as our political system becomes increasingly acrimonious and our legislative process becomes increasingly gridlocked, that we are relying on our court system to adjudicate anything we can't come to an agreement on in the legislature, which is anything. So do you have any thoughts on that you would like to share?
Sure. They call the judiciary the least dangerous of the three branches. The judiciary is there to essentially make sure that no one's overstepping their bounds in the legislature and the executive and state actors too, outside the federal government. And when there is an actual controversy as far as what is allowed under the Constitution, it is the place for the court to step in and say, this is protected and this is not protected, or this can go forward. In the case of Obergefell, and
I feel like we're all still figuring out how to pronounce that one.
Yeah, I have said it at least 3 different ways.
Because I'm usually Obergefell v. Hodges, but
Obergefell. That's I don't know if I've used that one, but that's interesting.
Like I said, there's a million different ways to look at the name.
The problem is that all these opinions are written, and you never really hear the names that much.
There's no Rush Limbaugh of judicial opinions,
right,
hollering at us,
right. And even the justices, when they announce the opinion from the bench, they don't necessarily know how to pronounce the name, because again, they've heard it, they've read it probably thousands of times and going through the briefs, but they've heard it said 6 times maybe during oral argument, if that.
There's a part of me that would really like to be in an elevator with 2 of the justices being like, I still don't know how to pronounce this damn name.
That would be a good Twitter feed. Overheard at the
in the SCOTUS elevator.
Yeah, there was a Goldman Sachs elevator.
Yeah, I read some of those, which were pretty good. And or horrifying, depending on.
Right, absolutely.
Maybe a little bit of both, kind of like life is.
Sure, but coming back to discussing the Obergefell decision and other ones like that, the judiciary is there to kind of protect the little guy, and to protect the minority against the aims and of the majority.
Do you think that's like the mission statement, as opposed to maybe we just want to fairly adjudicate all judicial proceedings within our jurisdiction or within the country? You see what I'm getting at there, where you kind of have, when you're looking at things like this, I find it worrisome to sometimes bring a point of view there, because points of view are generally exclusionary.
Sure. So there's the question of judicial activism, where you have judges that can on the bench and decide things not based on any governing document, any law in the Constitution. They are deciding things based on what they think the fair result is.
They're working backwards from what they see as equitable and maybe bending their logic to suit that need.
Absolutely. So you do see a fair amount of that. Now, in the case of
I won't say the Ninth Circuit, but I just said the Ninth Circuit.
The Ninth Circuit is a world unto itself.
It certainly is.
There's actually some legislation being discussed in Arizona about breaking out of the 11th Circuit and creating a 12th Circuit.
Really?
Yeah. So
I would imagine that would be very contentious, though, because the way the power would flow, depending on how you break up judicial circuits, I think would be
It's interesting, we're here in the 11th Circuit, which was created from parts of the 5th Circuit, and basically in the first decision out of the 11th Circuit when it was created in 1980, it was the Bonner decision. They decided, well, we're going to keep all the precedent from the 5th Circuit before we became the 11th Circuit. So it'd be interesting that if they did create the 12th Circuit, how it would treat the precedent, especially if it's created to get away from the precedent that's out there.
Well, to get back a little bit closer to where we were, and something that's maybe a little bit less esoteric for the people out there watching, you were describing judicial activism earlier, and the main tension there is what's called textualism or originalism, where we don't look to the intention of the founders, or we look to that in maybe a very limited sense, but we looked at strictly the text of the documents, what was the meaning at the time, how has it been interpreted, and basically continuing our understanding of that language as part of that canon of precedent.
Sure. And the late Justice Scalia was probably the poster boy
the champion
for originalism and textualism. And he, say what you will about his decisions and how they came back a little draconian at times, but he was true to that belief that the text is what it is, and you can't divert from that.
I would like to add that he would argue the text is what it is, even when it had something that when it would come to a conclusion that he would politically or personally disagree with, but he was more committed to the unshaking nature of the law, or the permanence there, and what kind of stability maybe that provides for society.
Absolutely, and I think that that's something that many judges could learn from, and not necessarily originalism and textualism, but basically just sticking to your principle, whether that principle results in something that you might think is not good or even potentially absurd.
Well, and that's the whole conflict between taking a result you want and working backwards from there, or taking your principles and working forwards from there, but also having to view any problem through the lens of what is legal and what is the precedent.
Right. And, I think just as far as judicial activism goes, that I don't know necessarily that you need originalism or textualism, but the fact is that you do need to be under some guiding principle, and that principle should be based in law.
Well, speaking of guiding principles, I think we're up against it, so we will take a break and be right back. We are back with Rich Rivera, the sage from, Stanton. To give you a little context, I went to a high school here in Jacksonville called Paxton School for Advanced Studies, And Rich went to Stanton College Preparatory School, and we were very big nerd rivals.
Biggest nerd rivals.
The biggest of nerd rivals. The debate club, the math team. I mean, these were contentious times.
Stanton didn't actually have a debate club when I was there.
Really?
We had a debate class, and I took it, and I asked about getting involved in the debate club, and our debate teacher, who at the time was also the cheerleading head coach.
So we can extrapolate the quality of the...
I would never do such a thing. But just coincidentally, and she said that we didn't have a debate team because there was not enough interest in having one at the time. I don't know. I can't speak to what they have now. It's been a hot minute since I graduated.
You don't say.
Yeah.
Me too. And debate is one of those things that if I could go back and do it over again, I think I would have enjoyed quite a bit. But I want to wrap up this last segment to just kind of get your perspective on the world.
Sure.
We talked a little bit earlier about if you could tell people one thing, but I really want to get started on if you were to explain to the folks watching, what has your experience been coming out of college, coming out of law school, getting into the world, just a little bit of your perspective on life, Rich. I'm sorry for that being so unconstitutionally vague, but...
Sure. Well, my perspective on life, as CK framed coming out of school, I did go to Stanton College Preparatory School here in Jacksonville. I think at the time it was rated the #1 school in the country by Newsweek magazine.
Yeah, and we were number 3.
Yeah, something like that. It could have been flip-flopped. I don't remember exactly. But anyway, so we were #1. And so I had kind of a perception that basically I could do no wrong. And I went to University of Florida for undergrad and learned that things were not quite as I had been led to believe. It was a little bit of a stickier transition than expected, and it took me a few years to really get my bearings and to start moving in the way that I knew that I should have been moving in the beginning. And transitioned from there to law school. I actually took a year off and bartended, waited tables here in town.
Which I actually think is smart, having been someone who went straight into law school. I think maybe giving yourself that time to kind of digest college and then take stock of where you are.
Yeah, absolutely. So anyway, from there and then law school, and I returned as the prodigal son.
But not alone did you return.
No, I found my wife when I was in law school.
Who is one of the loveliest people I know.
You and me both. That's my wife, Morgan, and she is the apple of my eye. But she's a photographer here in town, and
she also works with animals.
Oh, absolutely. She is very heavily involved here locally at the ACPS, that's the animal control here in Jacksonville, and she volunteers with the ASPCA and the Humane Society of the United States and travels across the country, actually working hand in hand with the FBI when the FBI goes in and busts up, be it a dog fighting ring or a puppy mill or a hoarding case, and they go in and take care of the animals until basically they can be processed as evidence and go through forfeiture proceedings, because generally the defendants won't sign over their rights to the animals, and they do have to go through the legal recourse. But she's great. I always say that she really brings our karmic balance back into check from my activities and my profession, which some view as not being the most noble in the world. But I like to think that I do it in a noble way. But anyway, my view on the world essentially as molded by my journey, which got off to maybe a rocky start and took me a little while to get my bearings, is, essentially that it's never really too late I am the first person in my family to go to law school. I'm the first person in my family to go and get a 4-year degree, although it may have taken me 5 years. And
given how good the Gators were playing, I don't think anyone can take it away from you.
I did get an extra football championship in
which
that 5th year.
I am jealous of you getting to be a student for.
Yeah, so that was excellent. But essentially, it's not too late to get started in the right direction, and it's something that I learned kind of the hard way by putting things off a little bit too long. But here I am, and I like to think that I've enjoyed a little bit of success out of law school.
I think you're being modest, but no, I'd certainly agree with you.
Well, thank you. So, if I have any message to share, it's, decide what you want to do, what your principles are, and follow those principles and head towards that destination. And, things, as long as you stick to it, things have a way of generally working out.
I think that's really a great point, and something that I have had to come back to several times over. You talk about getting a late start. You're looking at me just quitting finance to start doing this. I think chasing things that you would do even if no one paid you to do them, like the kind of things that you are passionate about that you would do regardless of what the circumstances of your life are. It's always going to be your passion.
Right.
I think the constraints of the modern world and the necessities of a job, and especially with increased automation, I think people owe it to themselves to, in a changing world, chase the passion in them that is unchanging.
Absolutely. If you look at the things that you do either as a hobby or you would do volunteering, those are the best things to kind of look to, what you should be doing in a profession, especially if you're in one that is potentially easily replaceable now through artificial intelligence and just automation that doesn't even rely on artificial intelligence.
Even, outsourcing, call centers, whatever.
Right. And, I will say, given your recent move from the world of finance and
to this
into show hosting, this is the type of stuff that you were doing with me,
when we were just hanging out
for the last few years, when we were just hanging out, having the same types of conversations. So, it's something that I've seen reflected in your move that, you went to go do something that you would be doing anyway, that you do for fun. I don't know how much fun it is.
I mean,
but
we can try and chase the rats around in here all day.
Right. So, no, I definitely agree, though, that you should find what speaks to you and move towards that.
Well, and I think it is cliche to say, but I think there is something to chasing your dreams. And I hate for it to come out of my mouth that way, but it wasn't really until I kind of had to hit rock bottom with like my happiness and what was going on in my personal life and everything before I really took stock of life is too short. I've been on the planet for 30 years. You got to do something that is going to make you excited to get out of bed, excited to approach the world each day. I believe in that very, very strongly. If people are out there maybe trying to figure out what they want to do with themselves or are doing something maybe they're not, currently happy with, do you have anything you might want to say? Tomorrow's the first day of the rest of your life or whatever it might be.
Sure. Like you say, for you, you're kind of sad that it took kind of hitting rock bottom to decide it was time for a change. But unfortunately, you hear about this from organizations like Alcoholics Anonymous, it takes hitting rock bottom to decide that a change is necessary in many cases and to make a change stick. Without that experience of something awful happening to you, it's difficult to keep the willpower to make a change for the better, unfortunately. But I wouldn't, That being said, is basically to say that I wouldn't beat yourself up over, having to have sunk to that level before deciding to make that change.
Well, it's one of those things where I think it's the nature of being human and how we are, and how you have to go through things to.
Absolutely.
And I also am cognizant of the fact that the winding path that I took to get here, going to law school, getting an opportunity to work in D.C., getting an opportunity to work in both financing and real estate, gave me maybe some of the tools and understanding the world that allow me to do what I do now.
Absolutely. I think everybody kind of brings their own lenses to problems and to issues, and those lenses are grinded away by the things that grind us down.
Yes.
So it brings a different perspective, and you bring different skill set based on the things that have happened to you. As far as anybody that's kind of considering maybe making a move, I would encourage you not to wait until hitting rock bottom, not until some disastrous event occurs to you that pushes you off into, basically saying, a change has to happen, I can't go on like this. And the more that you can keep yourself from suffering that pain, and the sooner you can make the change that you are already seeing that you want to make, the better. It's a question of being able to stick to it, but like I said, if you have kind of a clear destination in mind and principles to guide you there, then I think that you should be set in following those dreams.
Well, I think we've done a pretty good job here of putting a bow, or maybe a very human bow, on the conversation we've had. First and foremost, I'd like to thank you so very much for coming. It has been a great pleasure of mine, and it always is.
Well, thank you for having me.
I look forward to us doing this again, and maybe with more of a bent towards the TV shows and the Batman and the jokes, and maybe in a little bit less formal attire. For all you guys watching out there, I know I wouldn't be a YouTuber unless I said smash that like button and subscribe. So I'm doing that now, so I can be as cliche as everyone else on the internet. But I just want to thank you all for joining me once again, and just letting you know that this is hopefully the beginning of something great, and I will see you next week. But thank you very much for joining us.